You'd have been about 11 or 12, about the same age as your young co-stars in this film, the year that the Busby Babes crashed in Munich.
I remember it well. Yeah, I remember it vividly. I was looking at the papers every day because, we all knew who Duncan Edwards was, and Duncan Edwards was, and he was still alive, of course, at the beginning, and the news was that his injuries weren't as bad as they turned out to be. I think he had a lot of internal injuries, but he seemed to be okay. And then over the week he deteriorated and eventually died. And I remember it was a great blow because he was a fantastically heroic figure. He was this all-rounder, and he was arguably people think probably one of the greatest footballers of all time. So that and Matt and the fact that this tragedy had happened to this man with these very, very young players, the Busby Babes. It was a big thing. It was a big, big thing. I remember it vividly. What month was it again? I can't remember.
It's February.
February. I was 11.
Playing someone as legendary as Matt Bubsy, someone who's lived such a storied life, what did you think about the idea initially of spinning off a fictional story?
Well, because it seemed to me, you could follow, you could do a factual story, you could do everything, things which were, follows chapter and verse, but there's much more of an exploration to be had through fiction, because it's not that fictional. It's all quite believable, but it's slightly tangential. It's like a parallel universe, if you like, and so therefore, in a way, you can show a spotlight on this man in a particular way, which is to do with the nature of the film, believe, and also the fact that the man was clearly riven by what had happened to him, and clearly carried the ghosts of these boys with him throughout his life. He never forgot them. And you don't ever really get over something like that. That's probably the singular most eventful thing that happened in his life, even though he'd been through a war and everything like else. But and also when you find out the circumstances, how it happened, the state of English football at the time, the fact that the FA was very not keen on European football at all. Sort of history comes round full circle. And he was, and he wanted to prove that there was a future in European football, which we've seen has been proven. But he had to get back to England in order to do that, and of course, that was one of the risks that happened, and it's a real tragedy. So I think that the story follows very, very clearly events in a way, and kind of sort of sheds a spotlight on it, really.
The film takes place in 1984. Is there something interesting for you as an actor revisiting eras in your life that you probably remember vividly?
Yeah.
It seems you remember 11 and 12 really rather well, but certainly 1984.
84, well, it's actually interesting because 83, I'd been in Manchester, funny enough. I'd been playing at the Royal Exchange. 84, was my first trip professionally in the theatre to America, and I did 2 plays in America. That was 85. No, I did 2 plays in London that eventually went to America. One was Rat in the Skull and the other was Strange Interlude. So I actually remember 84 quite well. It's quite vivid.
There's a moment about halfway through the film where we learn that Matt and Georgie have both lost people they love in crashes of some sort. It's kind of the moment in which that friendship is forged.
Yeah.
And it just leaps off the screen because it's so sensitively played by you and Jack.
Jack's incredible. He's absolutely incredible. I mean, he's not an actor, not a trained actor, but he can certainly act.
Is that one of those scenes that really leapt off the page and made you want to do the film?
Yeah, but the thing was the memory of doing it. Actually doing it with him, because, talk about belief, and believe. There's always an act of faith in going into a film where you're going to be working with basically 12 young actors who don't act, kids. And that was what was so interesting about somebody like Jack, And that scene, I mean, I don't know where it came from for him. I mean, I know what that's about because I'd lost my father at the age of 8, so I know exactly what that, and that memory has always been with me. You know, and that day in my life when my dad died, and I came home from school, I remember everything about it, literally every detail of that, when I got that information. So when Jack did that thing, it was very, very emotional, you know.
Considering all the huge stars you've played opposite, I think something really magical seems to happen whenever they put you with young actors. I really think Believe is your best role since LIE.
Thank you.
You know, which had a young Paul Dano
yeah.
back then. What is it about that way of working with kids that excites you and interests you?
I think that when you work with a young actor, and when you like LIE or George in you know, Jack in Believe, the thing about it is the journey that they're on, that you're witness to, you know, their story, and their story has a kind of, like the boys' Howie's story in LIE, has a humbling effect on Big John. It has a way of putting Big John's whole way of life, as we know, he's kind of fairly predatory, onto a back burner, and something else comes into play. Some other element comes into play. And it's the same with Matt, though Matt is much more skilled because he's a trainer, he's a manager, and he's worked with young people. But it's always different because the personality is entirely different. You know, I mean, Matt Busby working with the young George Best, for example, you know, this kid from Northern Ireland, and he had his work cut out because he was a wild kid. And so that, for me, from my point of view, that's a great challenge. And it's also not only a challenge, but it allows me to act better, you know, because it's all about reaction. It's about what's coming from you. And it's new stuff, you know, it's stuff that's never been seen before because it's coming out of that particular boy, Paul Dano or Jack, you know. It's very powerful. It's a very powerful mix.
And finally, there's something really appealing about a film like this in that it's a really old-fashioned type of family film that they just don't make anymore. It's not a sugar-addled, loud, crass, the typical fare you see in multiplex for kids.
Well, that's why I think it's so great. There was a showing at the Bradford Film Festival, and they loved it. They were packed because there's a real need. I mean, one of the big problems that we have with audiences nowadays is there are films that they are deprived from seeing. You know, audiences are really kind of excluded. And when we look at all the blockbusters, you know, there's so much thrown in their face, and there's stuff they have to discover. And I'm constantly meeting people who discover my films. I didn't know you'd done this film. I didn't know you'd done that film. There was a time when that wouldn't have been the case, when these films would be more readily available, even with the DVDs and what have you. Unless a film is available to someone, it's hard, you know. And these films, especially life-affirming films like Believe, it's important that they're made available.